And just for the record, we've read your extensive presentation. We've read it, so you got 10 minutes to summarize your presentation to us.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, I appreciate that. Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to be here. However, I don't really see how this is representative in that of the people who actually live around the ge-hitachi plant. I don't see the families, the homeowners, their children. I would actually be very interested to hear their viewpoints as opposed to just professional government workers and professional activists. And that, so I see some legal liabilities here for you. And that, however, as you've invited environmental activists out, I'm from Guildwood, and that in Scarborough Village. I've run the Parkcrest Tenants Association for 10 years, and that to address social housing property standard issues, and that our family has actually gone way back, actually to the Guild Inn. This is Regeneration, the Royal Commission on the Future of the Toronto Waterfront that was published in 1992, 91. My mother was actually approached when she was the secretary of the Guild Inn for the Bithoff Corporation. They had a 99-year lease, and that with the City of Toronto, and that to run the Guild Inn property, which is very beloved out there. The groundwater contamination from the Pickering Power Plant had actually spread 11 kilometers out there. John Bithoff, who runs the Sky Dome, very well known, he wanted out of his 99-year contract, so former Councillor Brian Ashton, whose name is in here along with John Bithoff, approached my mother to give depositions and that at City Hall, and that to get him out of the lease, and that which she did on the promise that the City of Toronto and that would step in and take over the property. Instead, what happened after she gave the depositions is that the city came in, shut down the property, and we were vilified in that for the next 20 years, and that on the groundwater contamination. And that because the residents out there are aware of it, and that, but they don't want their property values to be lowered. The same with the residents in that in the Port Union Road area. It's very well known. And that, so in any case, so that's how I've continued in that with the environmental activism, and that because of the issues that right now I'm also with the Scarborough Village Neighbourhood Association Partnership. I've noticed that the Ontario, the Office of the Emergency Management and that for the City of Toronto doesn't seem to be here. This is their only Get Ready, Emergency Ready brochure that actually has one little paragraph in here. Nuclear power accidents. Toronto's neighbouring municipality of Pickering is home to the Pickering Nuclear Generation Station. Authorities will provide detailed instructions regarding what to do in the event of a nuclear accident. We don't have any pharmacies and that set up and that in Toronto at all, and that whenever there's an issue out there, the media always has that we're located the Pickering plant's located 35 kilometers away from the City of Toronto. It's actually 3.2 kilometers away from our boundary lines. And that, this is Durham's Are You Ready? There's no mention in here on nuclear. And the only brochure that actually has anything to do with nuclear, which a resident in Scarborough brought to my attention, and he was up near the zoo, and that is a nuclear power safety, and that which has some pharmacies set up in here. I've tried with OPG and that to set up some pharmacies and that in the Scarborough area, and they said they're working on it. They've been working on this for nearly 50 years. And that. So anyway, to get into my presentation here, first of all, actually I'm going to skip over to this one. I'm going to go to this one first. With the background radiation and that, investigating why the radon levels and that are so high, it actually turns out that from the 40s to the 70s there was atomic testing and that from the States that actually swept up in an S pattern over the whole of the state. So whenever you're quoting your figures and stating it's natural radiation levels, you're actually talking about nuclear atomic testing that's in the background environment already. That's not natural radon. And that, so that is an issue, and that actually makes a good environment, especially up in here. Now, we're not included on this particular map because it's from the U.S. perspective, but we're actually in the red around the Great Lakes. It's very high, and so that makes a good place in that to build nuclear power plants and to have the production. Number two, and that was Fukushima, which ge-hitachi and Toshiba actually built that reactor right around the same time as the Pickering nuclear power plant, and that which is very archaic technology now. It was invented in the 1960s, and that along the Kennedy era, and that and also the Apollo space program, which, as everybody knows, is now in museums and that around the country, and that this is nuts and bolts. It's being put together. It's archaic, outdated nuclear technology, and that the CANDU reactors are you can't even peddle these to other countries except to third world countries. And you know that, and also in that your plants right now and that actually are not even worth retrofitting, and that it would be too expensive. That's why you're not even going to do, change over the pellets and that to do it properly. And the fact that, I heard here today that somebody's even handling this reminds me of the radon girls who were told to lick their pencils and that to actually paint the dials and that tritium, and we all know what happened to the radon girls. And actually, that's one of the reasons why at Yonge and Dundas they actually have it fallow there, and that they built the square, because that's actually where one of the watch factories and that was located. And that in any event, for the nuclear fallout, it only took 10 days and that to sweep across, and not 2 years. And that, so you have known for a couple of years what's going on. Other power plants have actually reported spikes all the way across. So that this means that your levels are going to be spiking as well, and so this is a legal liability for you, and that any nuclear plant now, because the cancer deaths are going to be increasing, and that so it's just logical that you would want to actually relocate, and that use taxpayer funding if possible, and that because you are a public-private partnership, and that with the Crown, and that's the whole purpose of having these vehicles, and that to transfer public funding into the private sector, and that without the public knowledge, because most people don't realize that the Crown is actually allowed to run for-profit corporations as long as they don't use public monies. And that in any case, and that all along here, there's a 30 to 70% increase in that through different magazines, and environmental monitoring of species going down, and that because radiation always targets the reproductive glands, and that. Now we can see here with the ge-hitachi, you're located on prime real estate downtown. Right now you can see your legal liabilities right here. Here's fire trucks that Google Maps captured. There's 3 in here. You can't see the other 2 there. Not a good sign if anything happens. You can see the condominiums that people have discussed. This is right around the corner, and that so it actually is an optimum time. However, in that this would actually be a brownfield, and that which normally the Crown leaves fallow for at least 20 years. And that now you've got the similar situation up in Peterborough, an even larger piece of land that's huge, right also in mixed residential. And now to go when somebody brought up McClure, they weren't talking a couple of blocks away from ge-hitachi. They were talking actually about the Ivanico farms back in the 40s where they got tailings and that from wherever, put it on the crops, and that in an effort to make the crops grow larger. Well, they only got cancer, and the RCMP raided and that because their shed was actually glowing in the dark, and that's not something from The Simpsons. It's a fact. And that, so what they did with that land and that was that they actually dragged part of it, went down into the landfill site at the Scarborough Bluffs, and that you can see here, that was built with that. They got that idea from Expo 67. Part of it went into the Bear landfill, that's why the elephants and some of the other animals are dying. And also part of it actually even went over into the Pickering Power Plant because it's made from reclaimed land. And that's also sitting on top of an earthquake zone, and it's unstable land. And actually you can even see the city planning on here. I've taken a ruler because we do have engineers in our background as well. And this is just a straight edge ruler, and that you can measure exactly 10 kilometers over on the left-hand side, over in the corner over there, and that's the Ivanico land over there, sorry. And then the first thing that they built on the property 20 years later was Centenary Hospital, and that to do damage control, and they put affordable housing on there. Because the Crown, they always build affordable housing and that on brownfields. They have a policy, an actual policy to do that, because low-income people, they can blame it on their lifestyle habits and that poor diet, smoking, drinking, and that. So it's always them, it's never the Crown's fault for people dying of cancer. You can see the Bear landfill up there, you can see the Toronto Zoo. Do you remember at Paw Sanctuary even said themselves they thought there was something toxic at the zoo? Patrick actually announced that to the media. I actually even contacted Bob Barker myself to look into that and have the elephants tested a year before, because I told them that's why they were stalling. And you can also see they built U of T there, and that was all at the same time. And actually that's exactly 10 kilometers over the reclaimed land where they put Pickering Nuclear Power Plant. Then we have the F.J. Horgan Water Treatment Plant there, and that, of course, then we also have the waste the solid waste management down there, and then we have Roman Haas with a pesticides plant right next door. That's one of the reasons that I would not even drink this water, because the Pickering Nuclear Power Plant and that uses 3 times the amount of water and that all of Toronto uses per year, dumps it back into Lake Ontario, but it's no longer H2O, it's H2O, and that because it's picked up an extra hydrogen molecule, it's now tritated water, and that which causes cancer. And that when you were talking about 15 years ago, somebody being out in the area of the plant out there, that was Sister Bertel, and that she actually was a dual citizen Catholic nun, and that who died last year from cancer. And she actually went out to your plant when she retired, and she was trying to bring awareness, and that because she's done numerous studies. She worked with Health Canada, the atomic energy down in the States, etc. And so that's your limit of your exposure in that neighborhood. Now here, this is our healthcare, and these are the emergency centers, and that you can see go over to Morningside Avenue. My daughter's father was actually born and raised in that area. My daughter was born with birth defects. My second cousin and that, who actually after the 1974 loss of coolant episode at the Pickering Power Plant, which actually brought in building code in 1975, she was a poster child in that, Katrina O'Neill, and that for Sick Kids Hospital. She died at the age of 7 of leukemia. And that, yes, and that. Here is the Ivanico, the Melbourne Radiological Law case, and that you can read about, and that. But on here, actually, the only reason that a settlement was even done here, and that the one big victory that we've had in environmental law, and that is because the Heitingtons and that were in academia that the Crown could not argue with. And one of them, his daughter actually was a dental assistant, and she died of radiation exposure, both from living on McClure Crescent, and that because it wasn't revealed to them, as well as working in the trade. Now, maybe she wouldn't have picked being a dental assistant if she had had proper disclosure, so that's how the Heitingtons won their case, and that still is there today. This is the REMP report, the Radiological Environmental Monitoring Report, and that for Darlington. You can see that they're doing a proper 10-kilometer radius. Not that 10 kilometers is proper to begin with. That's a minimum, and that because if you look at what happened in Fukushima.
Can you focus on the end? We're not on Darlington and Pickering, please.
Yes, no. I'm bringing it back in, and that because right here you can see they're doing mostly rural area, and that 10 kilometers. However, and you can see here these are the categories and that they're monitoring, and they actually include Oshawa residents. And they actually name it, Oshawa. I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on here and that, but they're showing that. Now here when we get to OPG and that Pickering Power Plant, they're only doing 5 kilometers. That's just right up in that to the boundary line, the 3.2 kilometer boundary line. And when I brought this up with OPG, they said it was an accident. However, I went through prior REMP reports. It's on all of them, so it's being replicated year after year. And that because there is no disclosure in that in the West End. Now here, and that the reason that I am here, and that is because when we're talking about an incidence of 1 in 20,000 people or whatever it is, and that 3 out of 4 people in my immediate family have cancer from living 10 kilometers away, and that directly on the bluffs, and the reason for that is because when the radiological effluents and that from ge-hitachi's rods and that are released into the air, they're not taking into account the Scarborough Bluffs, which is a massive geological feature, 300 feet high, that's world-renowned, and that actually acts as a chimney and draws it back in, and any engineer would know that fact. So all of the people living along bluffs right down to Fallingbrook and the beaches and that are actually being hit at ground level with the effluents and that. And every single family along there across all socioeconomic demographics and that are being hit with cancer, heart attacks, strokes, learning disabilities and that, thyroid disease and that, every single family. And that now, and this is a bad sector, this is a huge legal liability for you because this sector is also very WAS, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, people who have lived in Toronto up for over 100 years, who have held onto their homes and passed them down generation after generation. You haven't been able to displace that population with the other poor people that have been piled for the past 30 years and that into Scarborough because you can't move the reactors, so you remove the population instead. Back in the 70s when the loss of coolant episode happened at Pickering Nuclear Power Plant,
okay,
all of a sudden...
enough. Please.
No, well, I'm just
final,
finishing.
it is in there. Okay, we are not talking about Pickering or anything like this.
But
you just...
Pickering wouldn't exist without ge-hitachi's uranium rods.
Your uranium rods.
Okay. Let me finish. Your uranium rods are sitting there, and that stack since the beginning when the plant came online in 1971, they're still sitting there. All the rods that ge-hitachi has made and that at Lansdowne and Peterborough, they're all sitting on site and they're just decaying and that waiting for someplace up north and that to be found. And nobody up north and that you can't pay them any amount of money. Nobody wants and that this waste and this is why I'm stating you need to start doing some actual proper research with the actual groups that are involved and that because in the one that I went back here and that if you look onto the the critical groups that you're monitoring, and now this is the 4th largest city in North America. You don't have Pickering on here. You don't mention Toronto. You don't mention, Ajax, Whitby, anybody on here. And that so who are the urban residents being monitored? And that you've got a correctional institution, and that who cares about your correctional institution when you've got the 4th largest city, and that in North America, and that
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, wait, no, one last thing, and that I just want to go to this. This is a friend of mine, and that on Twitter, who actually posted this, and that from May 12th, 2013, and he says, Pickering Nuclear Power Plant is viewed from Bluffers Park today, this afternoon. I'm not kidding.
Thank you.
Well, no, wait. When I asked the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission what this was a photograph of, I was advised it was a controlled effluent release, and that is not a controlled release. It's exploding in all 4 directions. There was a frost advisory that day, and I believe a pipe broke, and we've seen numerous fires coming from that area, and something needs to be done. You need to move and that your production out of this area. It's passé technology. It's killing people. You know that, and I don't see how any of you can sit up there and feel proud about yourselves. Okay. And that I think you rehearse, but you rehearse these things, you change the stats, and that I've worked for the Crown and that for 10 years.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Explain this photo. Explain
Can anybody has any particular question? Okay, we would go ahead.
Don't just ask a stupid question to an irrelevant source. Ask a question directly. Don't just seize on the weakest part.
Can you stay out of this? Can you stay? Go ahead and ask the question, please. Go on.
So in slides 4 and 21, so start with slide 21, which is the picture of.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
So you've written on that.
This one, okay.
Yep. There's a high incidence of cancer, thyroid disease, and stroke running along the entire length of the Scarborough Bluffs.
Correct.
I have to ask this question. Is that anecdotal evidence?
No.
Or is it epidemiological evidence?
No, it's from both. And that I've run, as I said, I started running the Tenants Association in 2002 when I noticed that there was a huge spike in cancer and heart disease in our buildings, a population of 225 family units. I started to interview neighbors and behind us in the mansions, and this is also from our experience of living down in Guildwood and knowing a number of families, because my mother was very well known at the Guild Inn. So this is from a wide field in that between Guildwood and Scarborough Village. Those are the 2 population areas I'm looking at.
Have you taken your anecdotal experience?
Yes, that's one of the reasons I'm with the Scarborough Village Neighbourhood Action Partnership that's being run by Rosemary Bell with the City of Toronto.
Let me finish my question. So have you taken the anecdotal evidence that you have to a public health... No,
to the Cancer Care Ontario.
To Cancer Care Ontario.
Yes. But cancer is not a reportable disease, and that in Ontario, and this is one of the reasons, and that we don't have the proper. No, it's not. It's not.
It must be a notifiable
really,
disease.
And that I have stage 4 ovarian cancer that I was diagnosed with. It was caught at stage 1 in 2002.
Please let me get a word in edgeways.
Well, I'm still waiting for cancer staging and treatment.
So there are 2 quite separate questions.
Not really.
There is a cancer registry in Ontario which requires every case of cancer to be registered with the registry.
That's reported. Every reported case.
So there is very...
Physicians are corporations. They don't have to report this. It's not mandated by Toronto Public Health or
can I make a
Public Health in
suggestion?
Ontario.
Can I make a suggestion? If you really believe you have good data to support your claim, your statement, that there is a high incidence of cancer running along this bluff, then go to Cancer Care Ontario and say, I believe that there is an issue. Will you please investigate it for me?
I actually have to. No, wait, no.
Just.
Actually, excuse me. Thank you, Zach, and that. Thank you for support. I have brought this to the attention of everybody, and that a civil engineer would know that what I'm stating is actually fact, and that no. With you're talking about, we are 300 feet above the effluents. They cannot possibly go out, and that like right here, it's marked out here. It's showing it going out and that towards the lake. It can't possibly do that and that because the bluffs serve as chimneys, bringing the effluents back. And that you can see that by the flight patterns of the birds.
Is the investigation of what you're claiming is a cancer cluster in this area. That's the first element to, and you obviously have good data. You're obviously very passionate. Try taking a formal approach through Cancer Care Ontario.
I actually have, and this is what I'm trying to state. When I have brought other sick building syndromes, even in our own buildings, for example, if I send out, get a civil engineer and environmental engineer, and we send out samples, and that we're getting back Stachybotrys, Penicillium, Cladosporium molds, and then we have public health out, they get back soot and dirt, and that there is a big disparity, and that particularly when crown liabilities are involved.
I've made my suggestion because I think you have provided us with some evidence that you believe there is a cancer cluster.
Well, actually, I have more than that. I have my Princess Margaret, which is now the Cancer Centre of Canada, and it's called the Princess Margaret Centre because, as far as I'm concerned, the GTA is the epicenter of cancer in that because of all of the power plants and the nuclear activities running through populous areas, and that which even Russia wouldn't do, and that with their nuclear industry, and that. So the bottom line is, but I have my records here from Princess Margaret proving I've been bounced out twice.
Okay, listen. Thank you very much for your intervention.
For my personalized health care.
We got to move on. Thank you for your intervention.
You're welcome.
Go ahead.
So the